I had several comments from various people about not believing various aspects of this or wanting to ask questions about it. And if anybody wants to hang out with me and have me, you know, maybe say things in a different way, I'm open to hanging out for the next 45 minutes or so. I know, Anna, you were one of them. The three dots are at the bottom of the chat window where it says, you know, type message here. Just go all the way to the right. There's a little box with three dots in the center. In a cell phone, I don't know how to do it, but that's how you do it on the internet version for Zoom. And when you click on that, you see save chat, participant chat with, no one, host only, everyone publicly and privately, and just click on save chat and it'll save somewhere on your computer system. Daryl, do you want to ask a question?
Hey, Steve, when you save the chat,
Arthur.
yeah,
Yes.
when you save the chat, there's a thing, show the chat, and when you click on that, it shows where it's saved on your computer to a Zoom file, something, so you can find it. Otherwise, you can never find it.
Yeah, it's hard to find if you don't know how Zoom
But if you do click on that, show where it is, you'll find it.
Mm-hmm.
This is great. Thanks a lot for having her.
Diane, do you want to ask a question? Oh, she just muted herself.
Well, Anna, why don't you ask your questions so we can address them?
Well, she said that she doesn't believe it, and she wasn't clear about what it was that she doesn't believe. But frankly, you know, I look at belief as not something that you have to believe, that all you have to do is cultivate some kind of a small amount of doubt about any belief, and then your mind opens up to where you can actually research it and see, you know, facts and data that either support the belief that you'd like to have or give you reason to abandon it. Since that's how I've approached all the science that I've investigated, I've never had this kind of problem. Even though I believe things, I also doubt things at the same time. And so it's fairly easy for me to change my mind. But most people who believe Fauci, for example, they couldn't change their mind to save their life. So it's a problem when you have deeply held beliefs. And so, you know, it's almost like being a true believer in a religious institution. It's that same magnitude of a foundation of self. You know, we think we're about our beliefs, that our beings are about our beliefs, and that's not true. But if you believe it's true, it's probably true for you.
Hi, Steve. It's Sheridan.
Sheridan, hi.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Quite an interesting talk. Sandy wrote a good comment. She said, I'd appreciate hearing your perspective, Steve. Most friends and family don't believe this could possibly be happening. So how can you find ways to help with that, help ease that? So I think that that's interesting. And then maybe even elaborate on, you know, what your perspective was as far as what she discussed in so far as how much investment did you have in all of her comments? Did you have areas that were maybe not aligned with your beliefs? I like to hear.
Yes, but not much.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm one of those people who went through a liberal arts education, even though I'm a scientist nerd type. And it's valuable because one of the lessons is that those people who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. And the entire public education system in the United States is to not teach history so that history will repeat itself. And it's all very selective and it's all very superficial. And no matter how much revisionism is going on in the world about what it is that they're teaching, they don't alter their curriculum to reflect divergent opinions. Now, I've been scientifically educated, so, all the way from grade school through college. And, I remember this person asking a question on Quora, and I said, when I was taught evolution as a junior in high school, the theory of evolution was presented to me as fact, and that this was validated. And yet, when that model that they were teaching me was used to predict the rate of evolution, it was off by a factor of between 1 and 10 billion. So in other words, they would have, that theory of evolution would have required 1 billion times more time for life to have evolved. And yet it was taught as fact, and it was defended by the academic institutions as being more worthy than theological views of evolution, or spontaneous evolution, or what is it called, intelligent design, or the whole God view of things that made, to say that what evolution wasn't the case. But if something can be presented as fact and it's off by a factor of 1 billion, that says that there's something wrong with the system. There's an imbalance. There's an arrogance on the part of the people who are teaching this to say, this is how it is. And they were right, but they couldn't prove it, they couldn't demonstrate it, they couldn't handle the mathematics of it, which is supposed to be scientific, but was ignored conveniently by them. And now that, 45 years have passed, 50 years have passed, my God, I'm getting old. The difference between the rate of evolution and the predicted rate based on what we know about evolution now is only a factor of 10 off. So, they're right, to say that evolution was the way things happened, and that we can trace evolution all the way back to the beginning of RNA and DNA. But the point is that they did not have scientific proof for it to offer. And when they were confronted with this error of 1 billion-fold, they just ignored it. There was no scientific discipline to say, okay, this is just a theory. It's not fact, it's just a theory. Even though an error of 1 billion is actually, I think, falsification, it wasn't taken that way. So in physics, we're missing 3/4 to 75% of all the matter in the universe. We've got, every aspect of science has got these extensions in ideology and view that when you look at it hard, you find it's mostly assumption. It's mostly a floating theory that, there's evidence that falsifies it that's being ignored. And I think that this is especially true of public health. I've run into Fauci back when I was doing AIDS underground work, and he was diverting all the money from doing broad spectrum HIV research into things like even selenium and vitamin C. He was diverting all that money into the drug companies for researching nucleoside drugs. And, at the time I thought, this is criminal, this is stupid. And that's been validated. We've now found out that selenium plays a big role in HIV disease and in viral resistance and Ebola infections and Marburg infections. And so that's all in the Natural Antiviral Self-Defense book. It's already in it by chapter 2 or by the second installment, it's already in it. So, anytime that Pam talks about this kind of issue of institutional malfeasance, this is the norm of the human species. This is how humans get together and form institutions to survive. The survival of the institution becomes the action of the group. It's not about the individual people in the institution. And the people in the FDA honestly believe they're doing me a favor by preventing me from taking vitamin C, and so that I die from coronavirus instead of survive it. They honestly believe that they're doing me a favor. So it comes down to not good versus bad, because everybody thinks they're operating from a good perspective. I do, you do, Pam does, everybody does, you know, but from somebody else's point of view, that may not be the case. They can look at something that I'm doing and saying, because I'm telling people something about coronavirus and surviving coronavirus that is unproven or not proven by double-blind studies or is in violation of World Health Organization recommendations, that I'm evil and that I should be put in prison for saying those kinds of things. And those people are actually saying that. So it's an issue of ideology. Everybody thinks they're doing good, even when they do bad. And that's the origin of the phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And those good intentions, there's no accountability for it. As long as your intentions are good, whatever evil happens from it, it's not your fault. That's my main complaint about Democrats, by the way. And I thought her comments about Biden were perfect. He's a middle of the road Democrat with deep connections to the pharmaceutical industries and the support of bureaucracies and mainstream education, public schools, all of that kind of stuff. He's just entrenched in that worldview. And I'd rather have Trump because he's a bozo and he can't lie to save his life with a straight face. I mean, he's just, everything he says is a lie, so you know. Whereas when Biden says something, you don't know if he's lying or not, and you don't know if he's deliberately lying. It's just all, that's what you have to be a politician, is a good, effective liar. And I'd rather know that somebody is lying rather than have questions about it. And you know when Trump's talking, he's lying.
So can I just follow up real quick? I see a couple other people putting comments in the chat also. She didn't really address the idea of coronavirus. I mean, she says, you know, she used hoax or, so, I mean, we obviously know that some people are getting very, very sick from it, and maybe even the numbers are being inflated. Okay, so.
And flu too. Some people get very, very sick from the flu and die painful deaths.
Exactly. So, but how do we reconcile that part of it? Is that, you know, I mean, it is a real thing. I mean, it is making people sick. And so whether or not, you know, the conspiracy or what the level of conspiracy or whatever, I mean, that's where it gets difficult. I mean, you have to address it as being, you know, there is some there. You know,
right, but the question comes down to, you know, anytime you have a conspiracy theory, the question comes down to, can you reality test it? And so, you know, I kind of have this operating principle, never attribute to conspiracy what can be explained by stupidity. But there's a limit to that, and it's intrinsically wrong when a whole series of things happen in a pattern that look like serendipity. You know, the question is, well, is there somebody who's arranging it? Is there a hidden agenda? And so when I look at this whole thing, I see that, you know, this whole issue was supposed to have been, you know, a natural coronavirus that mutated and was cultivated in China or in a market, a meat market in China, where it was, you know, 2 miles away or 2 blocks away from a world-class viral, what do they call it, upgrade of function lab who was doing work with coronaviruses for looking at improvement of function as a study for supposedly protecting us against viruses. And so all of a sudden, massive numbers of people started saying, yeah, it was a deliberate release, or it was an accidental release. And I think what made me suspicious that it was accidental or deliberate was the fact that a couple of prestigious scientific journals came out with rapidly published articles saying, oh, it was natural. And my bullshit alarm went off. And so I was always intrigued by that. I mean, it's not that I talked about it as being deliberate or accidental or bioengineered, but the analysis is now fairly clear that it was engineered. And so it's no longer scientifically credible to say that this is a natural virus. And so you've got this part of the virus, which is a unit that's from this species, it's 2,000 kilometers away, and you've got this little activating factor, it's from a third virus that is in the neighborhood, and then you've got another factor over here with this virus that's, you know, out in an entirely different ecosystem in a different place. And that's what the gain of function scientists do. They take all these different pieces from different viruses and mess with them to see how can we anticipate how nature might mess with us and accidentally come up with something that's really, really nasty. Well, you know, the fact is that coronavirus isn't that nasty, that the death rate from coronavirus is, even with lockdown or not lockdown, is comparable to the death rates from standard years of bad, you know, flu seasons. And so, you know, it's obvious that if this was a weapon, if it was designed to be a weapon, that it was incompetent. So I'm thinking, yeah, it was an accidental release. But when I look at the big picture and I look at Fauci as a Machiavellian ringmaster, I wonder, because he's the one who originally did all that gain of function research. He's the one who tried to keep that program alive. He's the one that exported all that research to Wuhan. He's the one that paid them to continue the research. And so when you look at that virus and think of, well, you know, if it was released deliberately, was it released by China or was it released by Fauci and his, you know, people? I don't think there's any way to reality test those kinds of conspiracy hypotheses. It's just, you know, how would you know? Unless you actually knew the person who made that arrangement, we don't know. So, but it is clear now that it was engineered, and it makes it clear that it was the US government that funded the manufacturing of that virus that we're now dealing with. Even if they didn't release it deliberately and it was accidentally released, it was still funded by the US government. Diane?
Could you give us, this is really interesting what you're saying, and I completely believe you, but when I think about trying to convince other people, can you give us some references? Where can I find out about how much Fauci paid Wuhan and those kind of?
Oh, that's in the New York Times and other major sources. So that whole thing about gain of function research, that's now been documented by even the US government in the various committees, or I think it's the US Budget Office or something like that.
So if I Google it, it's going to tell me lots of sources?
Yeah. No, Google won't show it, but you know, the NIH website shows all of this funding. You can look it up, and it stopped in December 2019, and it's right there. So it went on for years, from 2015 to 2019, the funding of China, indirectly through a nonprofit in New York City, and it's all up there. That's your best documentation. Forget about Google, because lots of this material
Google
is censored.
Is direction to New York Times, for example.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the analysis of the virus, it was really interesting that various people in key positions who, what I would call crony scientists, have, you know, put out papers about different things that confirm the dominant view of the institutions of the country. Like in the same way that scientists back in the Middle Ages effectively defended the flat earth theory against the round earth theory, and the sun revolves around the earth theory against the earth revolves around the sun theory. So it's very clear that history is replete with examples of scientists who defend, against the evolution of science and the advancement of science. So I see that going on in the United States, and you've got people like, what's his name, Stanford, Ioannidis, John Ioannidis, who've put out stuff saying the statistics that they're using in their models are totally fraudulent, and here's this emeritus, prestigious, physician or professor who's regarded as one of the world experts in statistics saying this is all, bogus. All the stuff that's being said about coronavirus is wrong. And yet, because it's based in statistics, and the release of this kind of information cannot be disseminated other than through the marketplace, grassroots outreach, places like, YouTube and Facebook and BitChute and places like that. You're never going to see it on the news.
Could you give us the name of that Stanford professor again?
Ioannidis, John Ioannidis, Ioannidis, something like that. I have to look up his name every time I try to spell it, but it's in the it's in several places that I've written about him for a long time. He's the one who has said that 50% of all scientific research involving placebo-controlled double-blind studies is falsified within 10 years. That's how bad science is. And in the field of nutrition and psychology, it's 90% is invalidated within 10 years. So of course, that's very controversial, but that prompted several scientific institutions to make their fraud reporting systems anonymous, so that anybody reporting scientific fraud and malfeasance could not be retaliated against. Only the people at the scientific institution knew who people really were. And the reports of scientific fraud went up by a factor of 10. So now you've got hydroxychloroquine studies being retracted by major journals because of this political influence on the science. And they're now saying, okay, we were wrong, and blah, blah, blah. But the whole point is, who influenced them to publish these fraudulent scientific studies? We know, for example, that the prudent diet that we've been advised by the US government to cut down on animal fat and eat vegetable fat instead, we know that that was powered economically by the US food industry. I mean, the vegetable oil industry that's the kind of oil that's produced in the continental United States. And it's the major source of fat in the United States. And so the fact that the government came up with this huge program to get people to consume it on a wholesale basis as a food staple, that went on for more than 50 years. It's actually kind of still going on now, even though the fraud and the malfeasance and the scientific evidence against it has now gone mainstream. It wasn't published in a top-level journal. So the early stuff that's preliminary and speculative, that was published in a top-end journal. But the new stuff that says, yeah, in the oldest population, cancer is up by a factor of 8 because of this oil that people are consuming, that never made it to primetime journal. So it's obvious that the public health mission of the government is fictitious. It's a mission statement that is in no way a reality.
It would have been really interesting to hear her, hi, it's Sheridan again, talk a little bit more about ways to jump out of getting vaccinated. So, I mean, even in the vaccine literature, you can read it and they'll say, if you have autoimmune disease and or it is evidenced in a family member, you can opt out. you can, they cannot force you to do that. I mean, if this all comes to pass, they can say,
But
okay, well then if
that's
you
science.
don't.
That's science and medicine, where the value of an individual is important. But when you're dealing with public health, an individual doesn't matter.
Correct.
I mean, it's all a matter of numbers. And if you harm 10 people to save 10,000 people, you're doing a good job, even though you have no evidentiary basis to prove that those 10,000 that you saved were actually saved.
Do you have any other ideas for that? I mean, any other
Well,
ways
yes,
to get yourself
yes.
opted out?
Well, no, I mean, I think that there's a lot of things you can do. One is you can join a church that states those kinds of religious exemptions, and join in any legal suit on the basis of First Amendment violation of religious freedoms. Also, you can opt out by taking a massive dose of vitamin C when you get vaccinated, or your kids get vaccinated. So you shut down the effect of the adjuvant in the vaccine. And so you get a little bit of antigen, and that's not necessarily particularly dangerous. I mean, the average person gets exposed to somewhere between 20 and 200 novel viruses every year. I don't know the exact number, but it's way more than people think. And yet, it's all in the noise. We don't notice it. 9 out of 10 times we get an infection, we don't even notice it. And even when we do, we don't particularly care about it. The whole point is that this is a media campaign, because coronavirus is roughly comparable to flu in terms of most of the variables that we look at, in terms of mortality, in terms of infectivity, in terms of frequency. And most of these things go through the population in about 30 days. So when you look at some of the CDC statistics, you'll see this curve, this 30-day curve here for influenza A, and this 30-day curve for influenza B, and then this 30-day curve for coronavirus. And they're kind of overlapping and next to each other. And that's just means 30 days. That's the time frame that these things run their course. And when a new strain comes around, it's going to run its course in about 30 days. And it goes through the entire world in about 30 days. Well, vaccine development, it's not 30 days. That's assuming that on day one, you could identify the virus, and then by the end of a week, you could have a candidate thing, and by the end of the 2 weeks, in the middle of the peak of the curve, you could make that vaccination commercially available. We're not even within an order of magnitude of those kinds of timeframes. You're dealing with bureaucracy. By the time they identify what the strain is, the entire 30 days is over. It's no longer possible to intervene in that particular epidemic. So on that level, there's nothing to do with it. But in terms of personal survival, you can take vitamin D, you can take vitamin C, you can take zinc, there's all that stuff I'm writing about in the Natural Antiviral Self-Defense. That's all part of that immunity. And the whole thing with aging, that's now a massive movement, massive fringe movement in the United States, where baby boomers are now focused on this issue of understanding the mechanisms of and intervening in aging. And we got stem cell infusions, we've got exosome delivery systems, we've got all this advanced technology for doing it, when there's technology that's very, very simple that we're not using. For example, exercise reverses a lot of the negative effects of aging as a pre-existing condition. So are these people at the CDC talking about seniors getting exercise, and seniors in homes getting exercise, or seniors in home getting time out in the sun so that they can have their natural level of vitamin D? No. So, it's there. They want those people to die. They don't want to support them. They don't care about them. I mean, you've got a blatant issue with being Black and male as a risk factor for COVID. So are the Black powers that be talking about getting blacks, males into the sun to raise their vitamin D, or taking vitamin D as a supplement to overcome this? No, they're not. So there's a disconnect when you're dealing with individual values and political process. So, you know, there's a couple of ways you can make that work for you. One, keep quiet about everything so that they don't know that you're a rebel. And so if and when we're all armbanded and stuff, you could actually have some kind of a slave smuggling path, and you could participate in that kind of level where they wouldn't know that you were a rebel. Or you can, you know, join, what was it? Save Americans from whatever, you know, and you can be political about it. Well, they'll know exactly who and where you are, and they might come for you. Now, that's the path I'm taking. I mean, I said on one of my videos and in another place, the government can drop the death rate from COVID to as low as they want to based on political, their political views. They can do that. The fact that they're not says something.
Hey, I have something. This is Derek.
Derek.
I'm calling from Virginia, and I'm so happy that I found the Silicon Valley Health Association Institute. There's a lot going on. You know, my remarks were today from the conversation. I was grateful to hear her words, but the biggest thing for me, having grown up in Brooklyn, New York, and had these cultural stovepipes, the biggest thing for me is that I'm sitting here in front of you and others who are listening in a very different picture as opposed to when I grew up. It was very, very much segregated, and things were listed as black or white or things are done this way. And I was so much against that, but as a child, I had no voice in that matter. And so I told the line. But the biggest thing is that hearing this conference as well as other lectures, I see us being more unified. And you're very right. For the old community, because my parents are older and they're amongst others, they're not exercising, they're eating sugar cookies all the time and drinking coffee. I'm telling them you gotta stop this and get out and walk and get better. But they're tied to a pattern, a behavioral pattern that is so ingrained, but it's helping me to get out of the subconscious pattern that even I was tied to. And that's so difficult to change that, but I'm grateful because the people that are here, it reminds me of not only this is a subset of so many subsets around our planet who are waking up. And that's what I think is happening. There's a wake up, and we have to find that way, and we will find that way of going. But the Black Lives Matter, all these other things are what you call silent weapons for silent wars. They misdirect us, and we're missing the point every time. It's misdirection. You know what it is, sleight of hand. And
that's right. That's the institutional influence on it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And even within my so-called Black culture, they treated me like they treated Martin Luther King when he said, wait a minute, this is not right for everybody. They ransacked him and he died, of course, but I'm feeling that same thing. Like, what are you talking about? This is an issue. COVID is an issue. I said, no, it's not. It's not an issue. But that's all I have to say. So thank you for allowing me to say that. And I like your lectures, and I look to keep in touch with everybody.
It's not just you. All kids have a credibility problem with their parents.
Oh boy,
this is always going to be that way, because your parents saw you when you were a kid and young and stupid, and so they can't believe that you can actually wise up and advise them at some point in the future. So if you expect that they will treat you as an adult, you're kind of setting yourself up for disappointment, because it's probably not going to happen. But this is also true peer to peer. I mean, there's all kinds of people who will discover something and present it to their friends, and it's like, what do you think you're a doctor or something? you know, that kind of response. So when I gave a Google talk on the issues relating to inflammatory effects in people with Alzheimer's disease, this was a talk at Google Central to their employees. A lot of international people, you know, work for Google, and people would be coming in, and there would be, you know, 10% of the audience that was from Europe that hadn't been acculturated in the United States. And when I mentioned the allergenic potential of milk and wheat,
Yeah.
they went nonlinear. It's like, how could you possibly think that milk is bad? You know, that's, you know, so you see those kinds of cultural beliefs and ingrained beliefs on every level of human society.
Absolutely. And so it was social engineering. I actually tied it back to Bacon's Rebellion, because there were rebellions, the Ohio Whiskey Rebellion, Bacon's Rebellion, all due to the bourgeoisie, or that class, the financial class out of the Bank of England and Amsterdam. They had to engineer separation and in a way that they would not be found out. And I think it's quite fascinating how they did it socially. And social engineering has been around for a long time, as you all know.
Yep.
So,
and there's also the fundamental problem that you have people in institutions that are supposed to be doing something. So, for example, my own experience with the AIDS Underground and the fact that certain people, activists in the AIDS Underground, were co-opted by the FDA, and to deliberately diffuse that alignment. Also, the National Down Syndrome Association, when I was doing volunteer work for Down syndrome, we were talking about nutritional therapy that turned out to reduce mental retardation by 85% in Down syndrome children. If they start at birth and they continue through 2 years of age, that they have 85% less mental retardation. Well, the National Down Syndrome Association came down on that like bricks, you know. And so institutions have institutional survival mechanisms, even when they're supposed to have a mission for the people that they're representing. And so I no longer give any money, charity money, to any institution where the founder isn't still in charge of things.
wow. Wow. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek.
You're welcome. I look forward to the next program. Thanks.
Yeah, anybody who wants to can email me to get a copy of the Natural Antiviral Self-Defense book. It's being published on a version by version basis on patreon.com. And so if you want to get access to it, you can go through Patreon to get it, or you can actually email me directly to get it.
Can you give us that wonderful email link? Is it on some of the announcements that you send out from Meetup?
No.
Okay.
It's not SVHI. It's something that I'm just doing as an author, and so I'm doing these kinds of things as part of my outreach. So it's kind of like, you know, what good can I do in the world? And I learned long ago that when you take on the government politically, you get creamed, and when you take on the government from grassroots level, you can possibly win. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing it from the grassroots level, and writing a book is a grassroots outreach, and SVHI is a grassroots outreach. But if you go to patreon.com/SW Fowkes, Stephen William Fowkes, SW Fowkes, you'll go right to that page, and it's $1 to get the book.
Okay.
Doctor, I have a question.
I'm not a doctor. I'm
sorry.
I'm a chemist.
Okay, chemist. I have a question. Last week, Dr. Myhill brought up Lewis iodine.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you feel about that with this vaccination, as well as licorice root? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, licorice root and its involvement in adrenal issues and stuff like that. It's been on and off my radar for decades. But iodine is one of those controversial ones that probably does have some degree of risk associated with it, especially for people with goiters. That if you do iodine too fast, you can get into trouble. But you can take 10 or 100 times the amount of iodine that you need to do thyroid hormone and have other kinds of effects. So it's kind of being used as if it was a drug. And many vitamins are like that. You know, vitamin C, for example, when you're dealing with something as severe as the Hong Kong flu or the swine flu or the coronavirus, the amount of vitamin C it takes to shut that down in somebody with multiple pre-existing conditions could be 100 to 200 grams a day, which is 1,000 times what a normal animal, or 100 times what a normal animal would make when they're infected. So, you know, when something is used in a way that's beyond physiological, I think about it as kind of a pharmacological application of a nutrient. But that's what I think is the key to understanding the difference between vitamin C as a vitamin and vitamin C as a therapeutic. Vitamin C as a vitamin, that concept is very small amounts, saturate the enzymes, and that's all you need. And when you realize that vitamin C also serves a second function as an antioxidant, where it's consumed by oxidative processes, and because we don't make it, we can't regenerate it like dogs and cats and goats and pigs and horses can. We have to supplement it in massive quantities to come close to reaching their level of antiviral self-defense. So it's like a whole concept change from vitamin as being this small effective thing that gets reused and reused and reused, you know, almost infinitely, to vitamin as something that is consumed in the process of its doing its job, and it has to be recycled by a mechanism that's fundamentally faulty in people with pre-existing conditions. All of a sudden, the issue of vitamin shifts, and the doctors are not going to give up their concept of vitamin. They're just not.
Okay, so how do you feel about glutathione used after a vaccination to detox the body of the substance?
Well, it's good because the adjuvant attacks glutathione. So it's right on target. So the aluminum in the vaccine or the mercury in the vaccine, they bind to glutathione, drop the glutathione level down to the point that your immune system overreacts. And we also call that a cytokine storm. When you have a virus on board and the oxidative stress overwhelms your vitamin C and glutathione, it gets to the point where your immune system goes out of control because the on switch is on and the off switch is missing. It's not even working at all. And so adding glutathione to a vaccination is treating the problem directly. The problem is that we can make more glutathione, but glutathione and vitamin C are balanced with respect to each other. Glutathione reduces vitamin C reduces glutathione. Some of the burden on glutathione is taken up by vitamin C, and we can't make more vitamin C. So it turns out that when you're talking about death as the outcome for this kind of attack on glutathione, it's the vitamin C that's the weak link in the problem because we can't make it. There's no way around that, the fact that we can't make it. Whereas glutathione, you can always make more. And now if the vaccination insult is too fast for us to make more glutathione, yes. But if you dump a load of vitamin C into the body, it will reduce your glutathione and protect you better than glutathione will to support your vitamin C.
Okay, thank you so much.
Steve, it's Sheridan again.
Uh-huh.
I just want to say, I actually did use too much iodine and I am now hyperthyroid. So you do definitely have to be careful with iodine. And then, so if you have any hacks for that, I'd love to hear it. And then the other thing also, I would love to know, do you like to do glutathione directly in the liposomal, or do you like the precursors? Because I've heard a lot of talk about using more NAC in the context of COVID versus glutathione. So I'd love to have you weigh in on that.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Yeah, there's a couple of problems with glutathione. One, it doesn't taste good. Number two, it's partially digested by your digestive systems. And three, the amount of antioxidant you have on it is like a third of what you get from NAC. So there's 3 amino acids on glutathione, there's only 1 on NAC. And they both have the same 1 sulfhydryl group. So in terms of glutathione mimic effect, NAC is much more efficient. Also, I think that when you're dealing with, let's say, COVID or flu or something like that, time is of the essence. So if you delay, you get your first symptom of flu or COVID, and you delay 24 hours, you're going to get much, much, much sicker. If you delay 48 hours, it's really worse than that. And 72 hours, it's like, it's going to be as bad as it can be. So the faster you get your glutathione upregulated, the better you're going to handle it. And NAC is the fastest. So that would be my regulation. But I would say vitamin C gets in much faster than NAC does. NAC is an amino acid, it circulates in your blood, it slowly gets down into deeper tissues. But vitamin C, if you were taking 10 grams of vitamin C, it's going to flood your tissues in 30 minutes, they're going to be flooded. So it's a very, very fast way to get your immunity and your redox buffering systems up to snuff to react to the virus at the earliest possible stage. And that's why I take 2 grams of vitamin C a day as my base dose, anywhere between 2 and 4. And nowadays I'm taking 4 because I want that vitamin C present even before I get symptoms. So in a sense, I'm preloading myself. And the 4 grams of vitamin C is enough that the increase in oxalate isn't enough to increase my kidney stone risk at all. It actually probably lowers it. And it's not just immunity relating to viral vectors, it's immunity relating to bacteria and parasites and all those other, and even allergens and food allergens. All of those are downregulated by vitamin C sufficiency, or maybe the depth of the vitamin C pool might be a way to say it. Diane.
Could you say a little bit more about vitamin C and the risk of kidney stones, and possibly if you know anything about for people who already have kidney disease?
Well, they're very different issues. Kidney stones are an issue that I can go through. I just wrote it up in the third version of the Natural Antiviral Self-Defense book. So that should be out, by the latest Monday of next week. And it might be out Thursday or Friday this week. But in terms of kidney disease, that's more of an aging-related phenomena of the fact that the kidney is the second most sensitive organ to, for example, mercury. So, when you're dealing with glutathione, that's what balances mercury. So glutathione not only is your antioxidant, it's your mercury detoxification system. And so if you lose your glutathione, all that mercury gets released. And your kidney is the number 2 organ that takes it. I'd say takes it in the shorts, but it's not quite right. Takes it in the side. And the brain is number 1, which manifests as like Alzheimer's dementia. So in kidney function, the fact that it's reactive to mercury shouldn't be that much of a surprise, because the microtubules and all are mercury sensitive parts that make up the filtering capacity of the kidney. And Boyd Haley has done this mercury loading on animals, and then would take a group of animals and mercury load them, and then he would autopsy them and find out how much their kidney function was affected and how much mercury was in the kidney. And then he would take the animals that had that much mercury and give them this amaramide, which is a chelating agent he developed, and then 24 hours later sacrifice them and find no mercury in their kidney at all. So the idea that kidney function is, in a sense, the first of the aging-related organ failures that we see in humans is probably right. At least that's what I believe now, or I suspect now, even though cancer and heart disease and you know, iatrogenesis would be listed as the top 3. Heart disease isn't really what kills you. It may be your heart that stops, but it's the fact that your kidney function is failing that causes the toxicity that makes your heart fail. And it's not really recognized that everybody who has cardiovascular disease has kidney disease underneath it, or at least 90%. So I think looking at kidney function from that perspective of aging is a really good idea to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on with your age, is to keep paying attention to all your kidney function tests. And to maybe at some point when emeramide becomes more thoroughly researched, to look at before and after kidney function test results after you do emeramide in the middle, so that you can see, does stripping mercury out of your kidney upregulate your kidney function in a meaningful way, in which case this is probably going to be rejuvenation therapy of the future. Will be taking periodic doses of emeramide. In terms of kidney stones, there are 3 factors that are needed. Everybody is assuming that it's all about oxalate, since the stones are calcium oxalate crystals, or it's their primary composition is calcium oxalate in the structure. But it turns out that if you take one of those stones and you cut it open and you look at the structure inside, you see all these hollow pockets that just happen to be bacterial sized, you know, mycobacterium and things like that. And so what you need is oxalate, which you can get from vitamin C or from your diet. You need infection, which you need from a bacteria that has to be in your gallbladder or your kidney or your bladder. And then you need calcium. And the calcium is provided by the fact that we're all vitamin D deficient. I mean, it's like 60 to 90% of Americans are magnesium deficient, vitamin D deficient, and vitamin K2 deficient. And the combination of those means that instead of your calcium going into your bones where it's supposed to be, it goes into your soft tissues. And that's where the stone forms, is in your soft tissues, when you have the calcium ready to interact with the biofilm, and then the oxalate to attach onto that. So the stone grows by layer after layer of infection that calcifies and then oxalates, and calcifies and oxalates and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, it turns out that if you look at people who take vitamin C and you look at kidney stone risks, you find that either there's no effect at all, even though oxalate is going up, there's no effect on kidney stones. And it appears that the best studies that have been done show that the actual incidence of kidney stones goes down with increasing vitamin C. And those studies that have been done with very high dose of vitamin C for treating cancer and other conditions like that, there's never been a single kidney stone reported.
Great, thank you.
Steve, this is Mona. To tie back to Sheridan's point about iodine and metabolism, I feel like my metabolism is a bit on the slow side, and I eat a lot of crucifers, and I think you've mentioned talking about reducing crucifers, but
Or cooking them more thoroughly, yes.
Or yeah, and can increasing iodine essentially offset that? Because I love the benefit of the crucifers in terms of sulforaphane and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of cancer risks, the more cruciferous you eat, the lower your cancer goes. So there's a good reason to, I don't know, weigh them off against each other. So the issue comes down to knowing why your metabolism is slow, and is there something you can do about that that's easy or convenient or sustainable? I mean, is it so if you had to take thyroid hormone for the rest of your life, would you do it? And I wouldn't. But I do play with thyroid hormone on an intermittent basis to, in a sense, exercise all my thyroid hormone pathways. I like bouncing things around, and my diet shifts all the time. Supplements shift, and that's a form of metabolic exercise. Every time you turn on a system or turn off a system, or upregulate it or downregulate it, you're exercising all those feedback loops in your body, and in a sense, making yourself more adaptive. Emeramide, like emerald, E-M-E-R-A-M-I-D-E. It's an answer to a question on the chat. It's also called OSR or NBMI, body mass index, N in front of it, NBMI. So it's got multiple names. So you can find information about it. And I belong to 2 of the Facebook chat rooms on it. The issue of thyroid hormone is intrinsically messy in metabolic rate. It's intrinsically messy because for every pro-metabolic factor that's out there that we get exposed to environmentally, there's 100 anti-metabolic factors out there. So it's very, very difficult in our modern day and age, exposed to the kinds of pollutants and contaminants and stuff like glyphosate in foods and fluoride in dental treatments. These kinds of things have an anti-metabolic effect that, because it's coming from so many different places, is like straws that end up breaking the camel's back. And because they're all so small, none of them get very much attention. And we don't even know how small they are because some of them may be logs and some of them may be straws. And because none of them are studied by the government, we just don't know. And they're all on board. So even if you discover that you've got mercury, you do a chelation challenge, it shows up in your hair or your urine, so you have mercury toxicity, you don't know how much of your problem is due to that mercury toxicity compared to other things.
One comment is in September, we're going to have Dr. Kennedy, who I believe was very heavily involved in amiramide. So he'll be able to talk a lot about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Boyd Haley would agree to talk as well. So, you know, that's the hidden factors that we have in our lives that we kind of accept and take for granted. It's hard to know. My first Alzheimer's client success was Lorraine Whiting, who was 92 years old, had 3 diagnoses of Alzheimer's. She had brain surgery for hematoma, couldn't dress herself, wash herself unassisted, couldn't go to the bathroom unassisted, couldn't converse with anybody. She recovered in 30 days. And she not only was dressing herself and washing and conversing with her son, she was actually intercepting her mail that was being held for, you know, a trustee, intercepting it and paying her bills before the trustee even got the bills. Well, she had lead poisoning during this entire recovery. She was on a well in Central Florida, and there was lead in the water, and she's drinking it, so it might have played a role in causing her Alzheimer's disease, but she fully recovered without even knowing that she had lead poisoning and without any kind of ameliorative influence on that lead burden that she was on.
Yeah, Dr. Bredesen, he has several categories of Alzheimer's, and one is caused by toxins, which definitely include the heavy metals.
Yeah.
And he's reversing the cognitive symptoms of Alzheimer's by looking at all these different things that weigh on it and taking the most contributive ones and going after them.
Yeah, and Simona, one more thing, you know, so we got cruciferous vegetables, and one of those is kale. And kale is kind of the darling of the new food movement and health movement. But kale is a thallium concentrator. It's highly controversial, but it appears that in certain areas where thallium in the soil is high, eating kale is risky because of that. And so if you happen to be in that situation, not only is the cruciferous vegetable loading, dropping your metabolism because of its all these cancer protective chemicals, but the thallium itself is a heavy metal poison analogous to mercury.
Good point, thanks.
We can split this into 2 videos, can't we?
Whatever you like. Well, you could, yeah, we could have hers, and then we could have a follow-up discussion on it. Yeah.
But it's not really a discussion on hers necessarily. This is veered off in 20 different directions.
It's all good.
Yeah, it is. Okay, last calls.
One last.
Derek.
Yeah, one last question. The Alzheimer's link that you talked about, do you have that in a paper somewhere that I can read?
The
That
Alzheimer's what?
the link, the solution that you helped with that person who is 90 years old, you helped them recover in a period of time. Do you have
Yeah.
that written down or that?
Well,
where can I find-
yeah, I've talked about it and I blogged about it on Quora quite a bit. So it's all there on Quora in public statements. But the three things that I used, that I suggested, I made a deal with the son. This was a good son, bad son kind of a thing with the mother who was demented. And one son wanted her will executed, like she said, to give the property to the Nature Conservancy, and the other brother wanted it developed into condos. And so it was one of those situations, and I kind of got stuck in the middle of it. And I said to the son, the good son, well, okay, I'll agree to give you some suggestions to start with, but if anything works and you want to continue it, after 1 month, you have to go out and find an MD. This has to be done under a medical umbrella. So he goes out and he actually finds a 70-year-old practicing orthomolecular physician in rural Florida, of all places. So, but in that 30 days, it was pregnenolone, which is neuroprotective. It was a high potency multivitamin, and it was coconut oil. And
Wow.
she reversed in 30 days.
Sorry, can you say the first one again?
Pregnenolone. Preg as in pregnancy.
Oh,
Pregnenolone.
Okay.
It's the parent steroid after cholesterol for all the steroids and things.
Mhm.
Mainly converts into progesterone.
I
But
would suggest going and getting Dale Bredesen's book, because I suspect each Alzheimer's patient has got different contributing factors, although there are a lot of common ones. And we have a talk by Dale Bredesen on our website, www.sbhi, but he's got a book and he's researching this, and he's reversing the cognitive symptoms by just taking the major contributors for that individual and addressing them.
Yeah. So the nice thing, the convenient thing about Alzheimer's disease, even though it's miserable for the family members because the person dies in personality before they die in reality. And so they're gone before they're gone. But because the pathology is not developed by the death of neurons. In other words, the person is still there. All those neurons that are there are still there. They're just unconscious to differing degrees. And so if you do a fairly quick job of reversing it, the person's back. And you would never know they had Alzheimer's disease. As a matter of fact, Lorraine Whiting went into court to have her guardianship reversed. And her lawyer refused to believe that she ever had Alzheimer's disease. And the judge didn't find in her favor because there's never been a legal precedent where Alzheimer's had been reversed in a court system before. Sad but true. And it was such a devastating experience for her that she didn't live very long afterwards. She died at age 94, but at least the last year and a half of her life, she was fully cognizant and doing her life's work and participating in her family relationships.
Hey, Steve, doesn't Dale Bredesen do an online program? I think it's even located somewhere here
Yes.
in California on the peninsula. And then also the Buck Institute is also another great resource for information.
Yes, that is correct. He's got an online course. He's at the Buck Institute.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
he's getting this word out.
Is he still at the Buck Institute? I thought he had departed.
Oh, he might. I mean, I think he's one of the founders or something.
He
but
was, yeah. He was a president, yeah.
His presence is pretty much known everywhere. You can get his book, you can take his online course. There's a lot of people who are using his methodology. And also people are adapting it to Parkinson's disease, and they're trying to, adapt it to other conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So quick question about saturated fats and the use of the coconut oil. I find really, really interesting. You have different opinions. I know he uses I don't know if is it the straight caprylic acid. But could you make a little, just comment a little bit on that? It's kind of paradoxical, but I'd love to hear your opinion there.
Well, saturated fat is the cleanest, most concentrated energy source that you have available to you. And when that saturated fat is present in short chain or medium chain lengths of fatty acids, it's something that generates energy immediately. In other words, your body doesn't have an efficient way of storing it. Mm-hmm. And that's because, I mean, Mother Nature knows what she's done regarding that, because the medium and short chain fat is too short to be solid. It's a liquid. And that would mean your fat reserves would be fluid rather than solid. And that would interfere with your survival. So your body, your Mother Nature only has a storing long chain fat and burning the short chain and medium chain fat immediately. So when you give somebody coconut oil, it's 60% of that is MCT and immediately goes into the mitochondria and gets burned. So your energy budget goes up a significant notch just from eating coconut oil. And that's not necessarily without problems. I've had 2 clients now, one current, who has a problem with their medium chain beta oxidation enzyme. And so instead of beta oxidizing it into energy, they omega oxidize it into adipic acid, into baric acid, and things like that. And that causes a kind of malaise and fatigue kind of issue and condition, stuff like that, that gets worse with the bigger the dose of MCT oil. So it's not without potential problems, but 99%, of people, it upregulates their energy and is quite useful in any kind of an energy brownout situation, which could be Alzheimer's disease, but could be coronavirus infection. So when your immune system is reacting to coronavirus and things are becoming oxidized from the immune system's response, it's the reducing power, the opposite of the oxidation stress, that keeps our immune system balanced. So the oxidation is the on switch for the immune system, and the reducing, the antioxidation stuff is the off switch, and that gives the immune system balance, and it allows it to turn on and off and regulate itself with competence, so that you fight the infection in a concerted manner. And when that energy system fails, then you get the cytokine storm, where the on switch just goes into overdrive, and that's very, very dangerous situation to be in. So giving coconut oil to people with viral infections is one way that you can improve their energy and allow their autophagy mechanism to digest all the viral particles inside their cells. So autophagy is one of the innate cellular immunity responses that, that vitamin D promotes and fasting promotes. So a lot of this goes back to that ancient wisdom of, feed a cold, starve a fever. So you want to be in ketosis, which is fat burning mode. And coconut oil puts you into early stage fat burning very, very rapidly. And if you lose your appetite and become lethargic and you stop eating, you go into fat burning mode. And you also go into autophagy, because it's the protein content of your food that suppresses the autophagy. So if you're low in protein, you're low in carbs, you're burning fat, you're now digesting the coronavirus RNA. You're breaking it down for your own cells to reuse all those RNA fragments for its own RNA, for human RNA. So this is all a nicely understood package that you can look at and say, okay, this is what we should be doing. And then you look at what happens to coronavirus people in a hospital. They check in, they have their fever done, they're put on a drip to hydrate, and that is D5W, which is glucose solution that shuts down their fat burning and their autophagy. Ouch.
More like yikes.
That's another favorite of mine. Wow. It's coming up on 1:15 or 1:10. Yeah. You guys having fun?
Indeed.
Derek, he's back.
And back. This is very, yikes is right. That's one thing that I use all the time. That is crazy.
Yeah. You know, they talk about the media being scary. Well, go into a hospital.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I have to get ready for a meeting, but thank you for this lecture, and I'll be on many more.
Okay, thanks, Derek. Appreciate your
All
comments,
right.
questions.
Yeah.
Anybody else have something? Okay, shall we call it a day?
Thank you all.
Thank you. Appreciate your stamina.
Thanks.
Oh, before I end the meeting for all, save the chat if you haven't done it already. Okay, good. Goodbye.